Welcome, everybody. It is our pleasure to share what we have learned, experienced, pioneered, and taught over the many years in the board vertical. And today's discussion will be on ensuring your seat on the board. Let me do a quick introduction of my co-host today, Martin Rowinski. Martin is a technology executive with over 25 years of leadership, working with numerous private and public companies. He is now the CEO of Boardsi, leading the recruitment space for executive placement into board positions. He also has recently co-authored a book focusing his chapter on the need for diversity on boards and how, when built correctly, it can help companies reach the highest potentials. Also, Martin's leadership has driven Boardsi to gain traction worldwide, placing executives from around the world with great global companies. Martin, it's always a pleasure working with you. I find you to be a fun and dynamic person, so it's a pleasure to be on this webinar co-hosting with you today.
Thank you, Mark. I really appreciate it. I've been excited to jump in on this and add a little bit of value, and I know you bring tons of it, so I'll just go straight into introduction. Mark Pfister is a renowned board director and a board consultant, having worked with hundreds of public, private, and nonprofit organizations and their directors with focus in strategy, governance, and technology cybersecurity. He is known as the board architect for his groundbreaking work in defining the structural components of effective boards. Mark's book, Across the Board, The Modern Architecture Behind the Effective Board of Directors, is a bestseller with circulation in over 70 countries. And I really appreciate knowing you. We've had a relationship for a while. And Mark, I'm excited for what we're going to bring to the table today.
Great, Martin. Thank you so much. And let's make sure that we go into the details we want to make sure everybody gets value out of spending an hour with us today. So I'm looking forward to that and working with you on this as well. So why don't we jump into that? And just a few webinar reminders and some frequently asked questions to answer them up front. So one thing that's quite interesting, when Martin and I were putting together today's webinar, we decided to do this from 3 areas of focus, which Martin will talk about in a moment as an introduction, but we wanted to give both viewpoints on this. So one, from my viewpoint of a board candidate or a board candidate coach's viewpoint, in how does a properly prepared board candidate actually represent themselves and what do they need to do to prepare properly? And then the other side of the table, from Martin's viewpoint, is what is the viewpoint of an executive placement professional? And it's an interesting thing. We went through, Martin, some interesting discussion on this as we worked through this to say, what is it that you're looking for on your placement side? What makes it easy for you to get somebody placed? And from my viewpoint of coaching someone in that space, whether they are new to the field of board directorship or an experienced director, what are they thinking that they want to get across during the interview? So it's been quite fun to work with you on this. And for everybody on the webinar today, their benefit will be that they'll get both viewpoints as we go through each one of those 3 sessions. So our approach is to really educate on the roadmap, the high-level roadmap for successful board candidate preparation and the packaging. The key is to get you to the table. I like to think that if you've made it to the table for your first interview, it's now yours to lose. But the hardest part is actually getting to that interview and getting to the table. We welcome you to write your questions in the Q&A section for the webinar. And if time allows, which we plan on making time at the end, we want to answer those questions. In addition, if there are questions we don't get to, we're quite good at following up an email with those things, and we'll get those out to those that have posed those questions. And something I see every time that comes up, I know in my webinar, is the question, can they get a copy? Can someone in the audience get a copy of the presentation? Absolutely, the answer is always yes. And no, when we get to the end, there'll be a page up with our contact information. You can reach out to either Martin or me to get that copy of the presentation, so you have it. There's links in there. There's all sorts of information you can click on to expand on the knowledge of things that we've shared today as well. Okay.
Yeah, so it has been a good experience putting all this together and seeing both sides of it. So yeah, our goal today is the theme of ensuring your seat on a board with three major points. We will cover the preparation of your expertise, experience, and certification, how to package yourself as a proper board candidate, and be prepared to ace the interview process. This is a high level roadmap of areas if someone wants to really drill down on the details, but we want to give you the internal steps of the roadmap. And Mark, we'll start that off with the first section.
Sure. So if we talk about expertise, experience, and certifications, again, we'll start out with the board candidate viewpoint, and then we'll move into the other side of the table, which is the executive placement viewpoint through Martin's experience and expertise. So let me first start out by saying that whether you know it or not, even outside of the board director vertical, when you go for an interview or you're preparing a resume or a CV, you're truly trying to compare or work together three areas, again, whether you know it or not. You're taking first the expertise, which is what you know. You're trying to show that how you've applied that in terms of your experience. And then hopefully you're looking at a way to prove that you are knowledgeable and you are someone that is actually well-versed in that area of expertise or in multiple areas of expertise. So I like to think of the certification as your proof of these things. Now, I always say, and Martin, you laughed last time I said this, is that just because you have a certification doesn't mean that you're proficient. And there are folks that I know that have some pretty high-ranking certifications that I wouldn't trust to paint a room in my house. And I'm not saying that the certification is the end-all be-all, but it's a great way to actually show that you take your expertise and your experience as a discipline and you've taken it to another level by, say, ongoing education, whether that's in terms of credits for an existing certification or just for your own edification and satisfaction of learning more in your particular industry vertical. So usually what I call this career trifecta, this is not so much of a challenge when somebody is in the realm of, say, applying for a job or even in the executive world. They're able to really get their point across through expertise and experience. And they will sometimes have some of the details and certification areas. Where this has really lacked in terms of these three areas has been mainly in the board director space, or the board candidate, as I like to say, that space, where somebody can talk about their expertise, they can talk about their experience, but they haven't shown the drive to actually take it to another level through the certification areas and prove that they are truly someone who is viewing this as a discipline. And this to me is extremely important to show that you keep this balance and that you are elevating all of these areas simultaneously as you go through your board director career. Now, looking at that, say that career trifecta of expertise, experience, and certifications, there's different ways that you can look at actually creating your authority or your background in that board director space. Whether you're a board director now or you're leading up to that or you want to be a board director, there's different ways to look at this. So let me first say that you have to have your board director brand. And whether that is 100% external or it's internal to you or it's a combination of the two, you still have to brand yourself. What do you want to be known as in representing yourself properly as a board director? So I like to think of this as a brand. And you'll see in the bottom right-hand corner of this slide here, I wrote an article some years ago called The Once Taboo World of Board Director Marketing. There was a time where it was actually truly taboo to talk too much about the fact of you being a board director and your experience in that space. It was something you kept to yourself. It was a very secretive world. You just didn't do that. Today's world is totally different. I'm living example and living proof that you can do the writing of articles, you can get quoted, you can do your networking in that space. You can go after and market your education and certification associations. You can do your teaching. This webinar is a prime example of that. You can be a board director and share your knowledge. Proper board documents, we'll talk about that shortly. This usually is a huge topic and the light bulb goes off for many people when they realize I'm actually talking there about your specific board CV and your board resume. They are not just a CV and a resume, they're different. And you're also showing your thought leadership and possibly even taking on speaking engagements that show your prowess in the area of board directorship. All of this is getting you to the point of being relevant. You want to be known as a relevant board director. The days of the friends and family board directorship appointments for the most part are over. And by the way, if somebody is a friend and family and offers you a board seat, you should be a little scared about that, because that means everybody else on that board was joined on that board in the same way. So it's likely not going to be very successful. So remember that you want to always be thinking about your board director brand under the umbrella of how does it make you relevant in the board director vertical in today's world of what's viewed as a next gen or a next generation board director. So this is about having a career strategy and brand in your board director world.
Yeah, thank you, Mark, for covering the expertise, experience, and certification area. And in our world of working with many executives that are in search of board positions, we see that majority of board candidates have the expertise covered. Fewer of the candidates have the experience covered, and even less have the certification covered. The certification seems to be overlooked, and this could be the decision differentiator. And like you said, this is that one area that a serious board candidate should invest time and have that covered. There's no reason if they're, just like we cover our education when we go off to college and get our MBAs, becoming a board candidate, all three of these are just extremely important. When you do have all three covered and put it all together, you stand out in the crowd, and your chances of ensuring a board position or a board position interview are much higher. Stand out in the crowd. Investing time into your experience and certification will give you that leg up on the competition. And like I said, being in our space, as we come up with the opportunities, we find the opportunities, and the companies searching for one or possibly three candidates, we see the candidates that apply, and we get to witness the ones that stand out and get the first shot at the interview versus some that are put on the back burner. So I think all three and putting them all together is extremely, extremely important.
And Martin, I know from our previous discussions when we were putting together the content for this webinar, there were very specific examples of where you had people with similar backgrounds in terms of expertise and experience, but the differentiator for them to actually get the yes answer or even make it to the interview and then get a yes answer to join the board was the actual certification.
Yeah, 100%. It can be a difference maker, 100%.
Yeah, I'll talk a little bit more in some of the upcoming sections on some of the certifications to consider, but they're endless in terms of how you want to put those together. But again, it is a proving point for you to show your ability to really bring value to a board that you are looking to join.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you, Mark.
Yeah.
So let's talk a little bit now. So we've talked about first here what the areas look like of your education, your experience, your expertise, really how those all work together. Let's now talk about how you actually take those things and you package them properly. What does that look like? And I think for many, I always get the same responses when I talk about this packaging side, that someone has been sending out either a resume or a CV for years and wondering why they're not getting callbacks. And I'm going to touch a little bit on what that overall packaging looks like. So let me first start with something very basic and I think is extremely important to get the foundation for first. So one is, I'll start by saying again that if you send a typical resume or a typical CV for a board position, you've already missed the boat on this. And the reason for that is that truly they're not considered to be the same documents of what you would apply for a board position with. So let's start using some of the correct terminology. First off, you are sending for a board position as a board candidate, you're sending your board documents, period. Don't use the word CV, don't use the word resume. Those are totally different documents in terms of their structure. So remember, your board documents now with an S on it comprise two specific areas. One is what's called your board document with no S on it, and the other is your board bio. So I'm going to touch a little bit on these areas of what it actually means when I say this terminology. But I also want to be clear that you will see many people still use interchangeably the word CV and resume when they talk about board-related positions. That's fine. It's going to take a long time for that mentality to change. But when you hear that terminology of, for a board seat, send me your resume or send me your CV, you should be thinking in your mind that I have a different document I'm going to send, which has a different structure, which are called board documents. There's a little more detail on this. When you get a copy of this presentation, you can click on this link at the bottom. And it's one of the areas that I talk about as the number one of the top 5 mistakes that board candidates make. Number one is that they send a resume or a CV for a board seat. And even to the point where the file name says resume or CV. In many of the consulting areas I get involved with nominating committees and decision making on which board candidate should actually be offered the position, I can tell you I can weed through 800 candidates in a matter of 2 days. I can eliminate 75% of them right off the bat because the file name on what they sent me on their document says CV or resume. I already start to question if they put the effort and the time in to do their research on how you submit and apply for a board position. So just keep that, I could talk hours about this, I'm not going to, but just keep that in mind that you want to start thinking about this in somewhat of a different way. So if we start to drill a little bit into this packaging and we say, okay, what is different from a board document or a CV? And I won't go into all the nitty-gritty details. We know that a CV is, for a very specific example, it's usually a longer document than a resume. But keep in mind that a resume, a regular resume and a regular CV, it guides you down the path of sounding more like management and less like leadership and governance material. You'll see a little bit of that when I talk about the structure of a proper board document and a proper board bio in a moment. But again, you want to get this level that you've reached. You want to talk about things that are leadership and governance related, and that you're able to shift hats from that day-to-day tactical realm and look at things from a much higher lens or a higher viewpoint, which is what boards are looking for. Boards don't want you to drill down into the nitty-gritty and pierce that area of the nose is in, fingers out, which they commonly say. So in order for you to even get to the interview, you have to be able to represent yourself properly. And the only way to do that typically is through the information or the documents you send for those particular positions. The other thing is that, and I view this as a trick in the evaluation for many of the processes and the vetting areas that I assist with nominating committees, is that for me, this really allows me insight very quickly in whether or not you view board directorship as a discipline or a hobby. And it's kind of an interesting thing to say, because you would think, well, anybody applying for a board position, I would hope that they're viewing this as a discipline. That is far from the case. And Martin, you've seen this over and over again. Someone says, well, now I'm retired, I'm going to move over into, I want to be on a board. Here's my resume, or here's my CV. They've already missed the point of, getting across the fact that they are senior level governance and strategy rather than the tactical aspect of what they've done in the past. Again, if you want more detail on this, there's an article link once you get the presentation called 7 Steps to Create a Killer Board Document. It's a little more detailed than what we'll cover today in this, but again, our goal today is to give you this high level roadmap of things to know and where to focus your efforts as you go through your packaging. So what does it mean really when I say the difference of resumes and CVs versus your board documents, which includes your board bio and your board document? This is what you should be thinking in your mind. Number one is the board bio is truly a way to get across your personal touch. You want to start with a summary paragraph of your accomplishments, what you view as your accomplishments, not the things that would typically be saying that you took a division of a company and raised them from X revenue to Y revenue. Those are very tactical things. You want to get across what you're about, how you make decisions based on values, not just based on the bottom line. Those are things that are board related. The overarching theme of your career, possibly include a quote from a recognizable source. Another great way of you just not tooting your own horn, but somebody else that has a recognizable name saying that I recognize this in this individual as well. Board and or board level experiences. I'll talk about that in a moment when we get to the board document. And education, certifications, article, quote references, things that are specifically related to the board space that show that you are an active participant and someone who is furthering the board vertical. That's type of things that you should be very proud of and include in your board bio. And then you have this differentiator, which I think is one of the big things. I have it in my board documents as well, which is explaining how values drive your decisioning. I mentioned that earlier. It doesn't necessarily have to be the last thing. I actually have to move that a little bit earlier in my board bio about how I'm a values-based decision maker. That's a prime area to get across in your board bio. Very quickly in your board documents, Your board document is the equivalent of a CV or a resume, but it's got a little bit of a different structure to it. And I like to say it's an absolute exercise in concise and precision writing. I'm in my, I think it took me the first time around 3 or 4 months to really get my board document where I wanted it to be. And I'm still in there, Martin. As I mentioned to you, I tweak this thing all the time. I'm in there. It's a living, breathing document. So you want to start with a board profile and summary. Just again, a very high-level brushstroke of other things you've mentioned or you will mention in your board document. Board and board committee experience. This is if you have served on boards. If you're looking to get into the paid realm of board directorship through private companies or even public companies, you should mention if you have experience in that space or if you served on a nonprofit, quite frankly. Now, if you have no experience and haven't sat on any boards to date or can't show which committees you've served on those boards, don't despair. There are other things that you can look at, what's called board level experience. This is a way of saying that you've dealt with boards, you've reported to them, you've done reporting to boards, you presented to boards before. You understand the decorum of the boardroom and you understand the format of the information that that board is looking for. This is hugely important. Even some of the most savvy board directors that have been board directors for longer than I've been alive, they miss this in their resume. I'm sorry, in their board documents. I just made a mistake. Board documents. They miss that, and it doesn't show that they remember what it's like to be on both sides of the table, both as a board director and somebody that's presenting or trying to convince the board of something. Extremely important. Executive experience is another area here. Of course, your education, certifications, membership, and professional affiliations. Big question I get here commonly is in the area of what level do I go to keep your board document, again, concise and in a precision writing format. They should be board-related things or in support of the board-related things. One last thing to mention in this, which most board documents miss, is they don't get across their core personality traits and demeanor. This, to me, is huge. I will tell you in a properly written board document, whether it's on the left-hand side in a vertical manner or it's somewhere listed in that board document, is getting across what you're about. What is your personality? Are you somebody that works through problems and challenges in a way that includes other people? Are you not this person that's, I guess Reed Hastings said it the best. He says, do not tolerate brilliant jerks. The cost to teamwork is too high. And this was actually in Reed Hastings' the culture deck for the company. And it's a testament to the fact that you could be the smartest person out there, but you could destroy the camaraderie of the board. And you want to get across the fact that you are someone that can work within that board in a constructive way. And almost all board documents miss that. Be the person that creates a board document that includes in some way talking about your core personality traits and your demeanor. It'll make a huge difference for you. And lastly, in my area for this, before we switch over to the other side of the table with Martin, is think about your board candidate packaging in a very simple way, but don't miss out on this because there's benefits to this. It's the following. Think of the way that you package yourself as having one major or an area that you view as your major and then 3 minors. And at the highest level, I'll use mine as an example here. I market myself as my major being these areas of non-executive director, a board consultant, which working with hundreds of boards gives me a unique perspective, and the strategy side, which I view myself as someone who's very deeply involved and knowledgeable in strategy. That is my major. That's what I view as my main focus area. But in all of those areas, I haven't yet linked myself to your board's committee areas where the work actually happens. So that's why I go into what I view as my 3 minors right now. The minors are areas that someone can make the correlation to say, these are the common board committee areas that I know Mark is going to be a fit in. I can put him in my strategic planning committee. I can put him in my governance and possibly my nominating committee if they're combined. And if I have a technology and cybersecurity committee, I know where he fits. So think about your packaging in a very succinct way that correlates to the working areas of the board, and think about it as your major, 1 major, and 3 minors. And I think you'll have you'll increase your success. Even your board documents and your cover letter to those board documents should very clearly mention these things. Let them know exactly where you fit before they have to read through your information and then they have to decide where you fit. You've already missed the point of submitting proper board documents. Sorry, Martin, I went into some detail there. I don't want to cut into here as well.
That's great. Great. I love it. So yeah, I mean, you did go into great detail, and I appreciate it, and I hope everybody else does as well. But yeah, from the expertise, experience, and certification to now taking that and properly putting it all together so that you can present yourself as a proper board candidate. And as Mark just covered, there is a difference between an executive CV or just a CV and an executive resume or just a resume. And we get to see a lot of these documents come through. And as you were talking about it, and you know, when people ask you for a CV, I tell you what, we're guilty. You know, we've slipped and not mentioned board CV, and the word CV comes out from our executives a lot. And of course, guilty for assuming that, you know, this is a board opportunity that these board candidates are looking for, and assuming that when we say CV, they understand it's a board CV or board document. So, you know, we're guilty. We're switching that and trying to take our focus and making sure that people understand that, you know, we need proper documents. So when applying to these positions, it is important to stand out and show yourself as a viable board candidate. Taking all three areas and preparing the board documents is the next step to bring you closer to success, to bring you closer to your interview and that opportunity. Yeah, you can go to next.
Okay.
So what we need to keep in mind is that this is not a executive job search, which would require your basic cover letter, your resume, and or executive CV. And I'm going to point out executive here. I'm not making that mistake again. And a professional biography. We are looking at board candidates in search of a board director position. And this is why it is important to have the proper board documents, such as a cover letter, a board biography, and a board document. So again, the need to be prepared and stand out in the crowd, I cannot express enough how important this is. This is what leads you to that first interview.
Right. And Martin, I know, again, from our offline discussions, this is something you're getting questioned on more from boards as well to help you weed through potential candidates. It's not as easy to figure out where someone fits on their board simply through a resume or a CV, which really puts the burden on you as the placement professional to spend more time in helping that person almost package themselves so you can represent them properly when that work should have already been done by the candidate.
Being prepared, yeah.
Absolutely. Okay.
So having that, as we were just literally discussing, having the proper documents shows that you understand the process is not the same as the process of getting a full-time job. And you'll see a quote there from Will Smith, exactly what we're just talking about. Stay ready so you ain't got to get ready. This is so true. And staying ready includes the need to make sure you always update your documents. Going back to Mark for 1 second, if you don't mind. Mark, how often do you update your board document?
So I'm actually in them probably at least once every 3 weeks. And that's for specific areas where I want to make sure that I get a point across more so. If an expertise becomes more hot and I want to relay that I have experience in that area, I'll tweak it. And even certain text or certain words that may be hot. Like, I'll give the example of ESG right now. ESG is super hot in the boardroom. I'm in the process of even getting a certification, a board certification in that area. So I want to make sure that from a horizontal knowledge area that's going to be extremely visible in my board document and my board bio.
Awesome. So yeah, you need to basically stand out and be prepared. Have all board documents up to date. Be ready, as this process can take as short as 3 months and as long as 2 years plus. We have seen all sides of that time frame.
That's for the placement, Martin, correct?
That's fully, yeah, not to the interview, but definitely, you know, as you go through our process, whether it's 1 interview, 2 interviews, how deep each company is structured differently. But yes, that's through the actual process. But once you have all the proper documents and they are up to date, your chances of landing the first interview and standing out in a crowd are much higher. I mean, this getting a leg up on that, I mean, imagine like exactly what you were just describing a second ago. If a company is looking for XYZ type of an executive and we provide them with 30 candidates, and like you said, their first thing they're going to do before they schedule any phone calls, instead of talking to 30 people, they're going to look through the paperwork first and start with the top and then work their way on the bottom. So if you really want to get a leg up, you have to be prepared and have all the correct documents ready.
I agree with that, Martin, 100%.
So go ahead. I think we're going to be talking about the interview. Yeah.
Yeah. So we've gone through the areas of, again, just to summarize, we've gone through the areas of talking about your career trifecta, how you are elevating each of your areas of expertise, your experience, and of course your proof. We've talked about the packaging side. And again, if there's more details that people request of that, please reach out to us. You'll see our contact information as we get towards the end or at the end of this when we move into our Q&A session. All of this, and I say this repeatedly to those that I coach in this board realm, the board candidate realm, which is you want to get to the table. When I mean the table, there's really two tables. The first table you want to get to are the interviews first and foremost. And then, of course, you want that to correlate and convert to the board table. Now, the hardest part of this, I believe, and I've coached hundreds of executives, and even those that I don't really consider to be executives that in the future plan on joining boards, so they're probably more in the management space right now. I tell them over and over again, the hardest part in this whole process is getting to the interview. You want to drive this to the point at which you are face-to-face with the person that's going to evaluate you and make the decision. Once you get to that point, I always say it's yours to lose. But getting to that table is the hardest part, which is why you want to have those first two modules we spoke about. You want to have them covered. You want the decision to get to interview to be as easy as possible for that decision-making group, whether it be the board or the nominating committee or even an individual board director for that matter. Martin, I'll even add to that actually from our discussion is that you want to make that decision. You mentioned earlier in this webinar about folks that stand out to you. What better way to stand out to you as someone to say, hey, I have the perfect person for you, is that they've sent to you the proper board documents. They reached out to do an interview with you to review those experience, expertise, and their proof in those areas. And now you're top of mind. They have just made it they've increased the chances and made it easier for them to get to that board interview because they know that you're going to represent them at the highest level.
100%.
Right.
They're definitely on top of their radar.
So let's assume you made it to the board interview, which I give you a high five for that, and my congratulations. Again, you've probably made it through, again, the hardest step and the hardest level. So what do you do next? And this is one of the biggest questions I get, whether it's in the webinars or in the coaching work that I do. And it's, what are you going to do? Now, there's different levels of what a board or a board member could ask you in these interviews. And there's different ways these are done. Sometimes they're done one-on-one. Sometimes they're done in a committee format to one person. And other times, which can be pretty scary to a board candidate, it's the entire board and it's the one candidate, right? So you could have 8, 10, 12 members with one board candidate coming in. The way I look at it is that it doesn't matter how many people are in the room. You have to leave them all. Any of these formats, you have to leave everybody feeling extremely comfortable with you, even answering questions that they may not have asked. So let's talk about this for a moment of what you should be prepared for, whether you're asked questions in these areas or need to represent yourself in these areas. And even if you're not, where you want to drive this discussion to in your board interview. And there's really 5 areas. I'm going to break down into high level of these areas in a moment, but let's just, as an initial viewpoint of the summary, the values, you'll always hear me talk about values first and foremost. It is the most important thing. Everything that you do in your personal life and your professional life is based off of what your values are, and I'll show you that in a moment. Then there's a piece of exactly where you fit, showing not only where you fit as a specific knowledge area on the board, remember your major, but also talking about your minors. What additional value do you bring to that board? Strategy and governance, I have to laugh every time I say this. You'll know why in a moment. That strategy area is something that's extremely overlooked in boards. A lot of my consulting work is to actually come in and clean up, quite frankly, that strategy area for these boards. I'll get into that in a moment. The learning mentality is huge. If you believe as a board director that once you've gotten to a board director position that your learning has stopped, you are extremely mistaken in that. You're sorely mistaken in that, because the need for learning has increased exponentially. We'll talk about that. And then the other intelligences, I'll talk about emotional intelligence and mindfulness intelligence in a moment. So let's drill down a little bit into these 5 areas and know that these are the things when I'm doing interviews and helping out companies in their vetting process with their nominating committee, I'm looking to honestly check the boxes off. Is this person that I'm interviewing, are they aware that this is what I'm looking for? And are they, again, viewing their interview as a discipline in the board director space? Or did they just come to tell me as much as possible about their experience? Totally different world. So number 1, first area, element 1 is your values in this board interview area. I am extremely skeptical of board directors that don't either ask me a question or mention something about their values in the first 3 or 4 sentences of their interview. I'm extremely skeptical of these folks because they're not understanding that that's what sits at the top of everything. Before you talk or ask me about the vision, the mission, or the objectives of the organization, I'd rather have you ask me about what are the values, or tell me, I've noticed that the values of your organization are X, Y, and Z. Let me tell you why those resonate with me, because those are my values as well. This is why I fit in this. And this is how I make my decisions based off of those values. It's what do I stand for? It's my ethics, it's my principles, it's my beliefs. You want to get that across. I would even go back and say you want to get that across in your core personality traits or things you focus in your board documents, as I mentioned. And then you want to correlate that also to your interview. Focus on your values first. There's an article here, I've also put this in my book, that you can read called The Story of Company Values. It's one of my heroes in terms of values-based decisioning, Roy O. Disney, which was he was the son of Roy E. Disney, one of the co-founders of Disney with Walt Disney, of course. But reading his story and his journey of values-based decisioning with the Disney organization over many, many years is a true testament about how you can keep a company on track through values-based decisioning. It was absolutely, doing the research for that article was, it was awakening to me, even with my focus on values and decision-making. So keep that at the top and the pinnacle of your decision-making in your values area, and incorporate it absolutely in the way that you represent yourself in a board interview. Element 2, exact fit. Now, there's a lot to talk about here. My focus professionally has been in the world of board architecture for over a decade now. Again, I welcome you to read my book on this, but at the high level, I talk about the fact, if I look at this in a board of directors, that sphere of influence, think about this sphere of influence as pie shapes carved out of this for each one of the board members, and where exactly they fit. So they all have a piece of the slice of the pie for core leadership competency. They hopefully have at least some level of operations experience, or a majority of board members have in-depth operations experience. And then there is the expertise areas of where that person fits. Now remember, when I say that, you should go immediately back to and start thinking about your major and your 3 minors. And go into that board interview knowing exactly where you feel you're fit based on what they called you in for, but also know the additional benefits and additional expertise that you bring to the board through your 3 minors potentially. Now, that's where you can really make a splash with how you do your interview, by saying, look, I've done a study of your board. I see you have expertise in these areas, but I think that for your industry, this is areas you may be lacking that I also bring expertise into this. There's a master at this. He's been a mentor to me. He wrote the foreword to my book. His name is Michael Lorelli. He has actually landed board seats by pointing out other gaps that the board didn't even know they had, where he can actually bring experience and expertise, and he's a master at it. It's something I write about in my book. But just know that you want to go in there fully prepared, knowing about visually where do you fit and what additional value do you bring to that board above and beyond the core leadership and above and beyond the operations expertise. So that's your exact fit, number 2. Number 3, and I'm sorry for laughing at this, but I can tell you that the lack of knowledge of strategy, formal strategy, not I worked on a strategic plan, not I weighed in and reviewed someone's strategic plan, whatever it may be. I'm talking about the formal background and strategy and understanding what it is. This is one of the areas that is lacking in the board space right now. And it's not just for the strategy of how the board operates, but also how they support the strategy of the overall organization. So I offer up this very simple diagram. You know, believe it or not, this diagram, to make it this simple, took me a couple years, many years ago, to create. I had to understand where exactly strategy fits. So let me share it with you today. First and foremost, there are really three pieces to any strategic plan. There are goals that sit on one side, there are tasks that sit on the other, and then strategy sits in between that. So a board that sits down and says they want to have a strategic planning meeting before they've set their goals is laughable to me, because you cannot actually come up with a strategy, which is the how, until you know what that is going to support, which is the what and the why. And then many boards go exactly to the other side of the spectrum. They focus on tasks, when really that is the outcome and what they're measuring as part of their governance. So think about strategy as sitting above governance. You can't govern something unless you understand the strategy of it, which are the goals, how it's going to be done, which is the strategy, and then what the tasks are, the milestones for a board to actually measure that. This is something you want to be extremely versed in as a board director. And I can tell you, in the interviews that I do, or in the prep work that I do, this is extremely important. I can take someone that's been even in the board director realm for a very long time, and I can tell you that they are extremely lacking in the strategy area. They just don't understand where it fits, which to me shows that they lack in governance. You cannot govern something that you don't understand the strategy for. Again, an area I could talk about years about. There's a few articles, and I write about this in my book as well, about how to look at the history and the evolution of strategy, and how you should really understand this as a board director. But for now, at our highest level, know that this is the visual. If someone mentions strategy, this is the visual that should pop into your mind immediately at any executive level, and especially at the board level. You can't govern it unless you understand it at this simple level. So that's three. 4 is the learning mentality. At a very high level, just think of your learning mentality, that you're not believing that once you've reached a board level or a board position that you stop learning. It's been actually quite the opposite for me, and for every board director I know that's worth their weight in salt. They realize that the amount of learning that they need to do has increased exponentially, especially in today's technology world. They have to stay abreast of what's happening, the changes, even the things that are not necessarily expertise areas, but the trending that's happening out in the environment right now that are their customers and their clients. That trending and social norm, the social norms are changing at an absolutely incredible rate right now. We see that in multiple levels. A board director has to really increase the amount of learning time that they spend, and view that as an area that is a time-consuming and dedicated area for you to be, and to become and to remain a viable board director. You have to have this learning mentality. Martin, I know you'll mention in a moment about how in the placement realm, from an executive and a board standpoint, this is something you're looking for as well, to keep that education going with them.
Yeah, like I always say, if you're not learning, you're dead.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. All right, so let me, one other area here, which is this other intelligence. I'm going to focus mainly here. Let me first say that when I say IQ, I'm not talking about your overall IQ like it's been measured for so many years and you have your IQ number. What I'm talking about is your intelligence in what you claim to be your major and your 3 minors from a board viewpoint. I want to know what your intelligence level is in those areas, how you've applied it. We'll go back to the career trifecta in that. Team intelligence is an interesting area. Someone I work with very closely in this space did her doctorate thesis on this, and it talks about just because everybody on that board has high emotional intelligence and high mindfulness intelligence, which I'll speak about in a moment, it doesn't necessarily mean when you get them together they work as one cohesive unit. It's really incredible to see how that works. But what I want to talk about from a board packaging standpoint for you as a candidate, and me from my coaching viewpoint, and what I'm looking for is that I am looking for an extremely high level of emotional intelligence and mindfulness intelligence in anybody who claims to be a viable board director. And I'm just going to read you 2 quick things from my book in here where I talk about this. One of them says that when you look at emotional intelligence, what exactly does that mean? And at the highest level, it's a leader's ability to recognize, understand, and manage their own emotions, along with the ability to recognize, understand, and influence the emotion of others. So think about that for a moment. I go back to that Reed Hastings comment or quote where he says, these brilliant jerks. if you're only evaluating either yourself as a board candidate or a board is evaluating you just simply on your expertise areas, they're missing one of the most important team building and camaraderie components that is actually going to make that board successful. And there are folks that believe that 90% of a board success does not come down to what it knows, it's how it shares that information. And EQ, or emotional intelligence, is a huge, huge piece of that. MQ is a little bit different. It looks at this from a different angle. Is the process of bringing one's attention to the internal experiences occurring in the present moment. And one of the best examples to give of this is a board director who I witnessed firsthand. Somebody on the board was trying to make their case and they became frustrated very easily. It was out of character for them. So this other board member with a high level of mindfulness intelligence, when the meeting was done and they took a break, he went and talked to this person and said, listen, is something else going on right now that's affecting the way you're presenting right now? This board member that approached the other board member was showing their support and the ability to look through the fact that, or not escalate the scenario, but have the mindfulness enough to know and go talk to this person. And it actually changed the way that the decision-making was done when they came off break. Look to get across both in your board documents as well as your interview that you bring a level-headed approach, both from the emotional intelligence viewpoint of how you receive things and the mindfulness intelligence approach of how you decipher things that are happening around you at that moment. It's one of the most important things for a successful board. And by the way, you want to make sure that other board directors have been evaluated in that same way. If you have high emotional intelligence and high mindfulness intelligence and everybody else on the board does not, I can tell you you're going to be the most frustrated person in the world, and you're probably not going to be on that board for that long. So that's the focus area. So think about those 5 areas we mentioned just now in preparing yourself for that, which takes time, understanding how you're going to represent those areas, and then being able to speak fluently about how, as a board director, you apply these 5 areas. Sorry, Martin, I could go on for hours about this, but I won't. But
I know you can. You wrote a book about it.
There you go. There you go. All right.
No, I thank you, Mark. You're a great cover of acing your board interview. I mean, all those elements are extremely important. All 5 elements are important, all of them. We have seen a common theme through the interviews and evaluation and what the companies are sharing with us. And to explain that a little bit more, in our space, when we talk to an executive, we do an onboarding call, and it's not an interview for a board position. It's us trying to get to know them better. And we do it from every aspect of, trying to figure out their personality, try to fill them out and what they're like and what they would fit on. We do the same thing with the company as we're bringing them on and trying to figure out the exact person that they're looking for. Try to figure out their mission statement. Not all companies have that based on their website or anything. So we try to learn things, and obviously that kind of gives us a heads up of getting a pretty good feel for who would be a good fit for who. But it definitely doesn't. It fills the void of matching these 2 up. But even then, it's up to like we were talking earlier, the board documents to actually get them into the interview. And then once they get to the interview, them actually acing the interview and moving forward. So out of all the questions and all the things we hear back from companies, I pulled out 4 of some of the ones that I feel are more common than others, but I think they hit on a lot of the things you were just talking about, Mark. I'll go through them real quick. How passionate are you about your purpose and cause? Why do you feel you are a great fit for a board? What is your assumed time commitment serving on a board? I think that's a great one. A lot of people either don't know, or maybe they just assume, just put in a couple hours here, a couple hours there. And like you write in your book, I mean, if you're looking at a board position, you're looking at 200 hours in a year. I mean, it's a minimum. And if you don't have that, then you shouldn't be even looking to be on a board. What personal aspirations could be enhanced by serving on our board? So again, these are just 4 most common questions. There are many others, and each company might ask for more or less questions. They try to get to know you from all angles, like you were describing, the intelligence, the emotional intelligence, team intelligence, and mindfulness intelligence. They really want to make sure you are a good fit. They're not looking to recruit a board member for, for 3 months, and if it doesn't work out, oh well. And they're looking for long-term commitment. From the expertise and experience side, but it is also important that you fit the board culture and the company culture. Being prepared and knowing what those are for the company are very important. Know their mission and what is important for the company. Know their values, like you've already covered. So that's just a general idea. And, like the last sentence says here, be prepared to answer these questions and more.
Yeah, Martin, I think, something that you point out there, you may have seen me smile as you said it, which talks about the time commitment.
Yeah.
It's an area that is extremely underestimated. And remember that even if we say 200, I personally think it's, as I normally say, it's more than 200 hours to be successful. I personally never seen a successful board director put in less than 200 hours a year for any board they serve on. And that includes nonprofits, by the way, which I always get a lot of pushback on that. But to me, there's no difference in the things that you have to do. There may be difference in terms of reporting and compliance in those areas. But in order to still serve in a way that is helping out that organization, it's 200 hours minimum, probably more like 250 if you're serving as a chair or even the chair of the board or you're on a committee. But that also assumes that you're not in times of crisis, because you look right now with the pandemic, I can tell you there are board directors putting in a significant amount of time. And the ones that are what they say overboarded, where they're on so many boards, they can't give the proper time. Those boards are struggling right now. There's just not enough time in the day. If you're sitting on 5, 6 boards, there's not enough time in the day for them to be available. So it's not really valuable to those companies when that's the case. But I appreciate the points you mentioned here. I think they're very valid.
Great. Awesome.
So let's do this. We have a few minutes for Q&A, but let me just first, Martin, you'll touch on your area as well. But if there are those on this webinar interested in going through a formal program that steps you through how to truly package yourself properly and then come out with the board documents, including your bio and your board document that properly represents you and get you in depth ready for that interview, reach out to me. I've been doing this program for years. It's been over 150 folks that I've coached that have gone through this and have had extreme success in landing not just one board seat, but multiple. Please reach out. This is for both aspiring directors. Maybe you haven't sat on a board before, but you're looking to do it in the future. And that could be years out where you want to make sure you're on the right path and you're on the right trajectory to get to those paid board seats in the future. And I even work with many experienced directors that are realizing that in order for them to still be at the table, they really need to make sure that they're viewed as a next gen director. And what exactly does that mean, both in their packaging and the things they're talking about in their interview? That has changed significantly over the last 10 years. So the way you represent yourself 10 years ago, I can tell you firsthand, does not fly in the boardroom right now for the types of interviews that even I'm helping build, the vetting processes and the nominating processes. It is night and day in terms of how those look. So you need to be prepared for those.
Yeah, thank you, Mark. With me, it's simple. I mean, Boardsi is here to connect the two entities, the executive and the board opportunity. We do have a private network of executives. We have a platform with opportunities that are available right now. We also do a custom matching process. We do have a secondary tier of companies that might not even want to be on our platform, but they are open to our suggestions. And when the right executive that has the right packaging stands out to them, they would love to have that talk with them. So with us, it's simple. Go to boardsi.com, schedule a 20-minute call just to chat with our account executives to get to know you, see if this is a fit for you. If you're a company and you are in search of board members, board of advisors, board of directors, please come to us and let's see what we can do and see who we can find for you.
Great, thank you, Martin.
Yep.
All right, so let's move to our Q&A. Just as a reminder, I'll leave the screen up for a few minutes here as we go through the Q&A. If you want a copy of this deck or you have other questions, feel free to reach out to us either directly via email. Both Martin and I have copies of the deck, and also you can visit the websites if you want to take what we're talking about to your next level and really get you prepped in these spaces. Martin, I see we have a couple of questions here. You know what I'll do? Maybe we'll do it in the same format that we did the webinar, which is from the board candidate viewpoints or coaching viewpoint, and then from your placement viewpoint. So one question I see here is, what is the top expertise that is currently in demand? And I'm assuming you're asking that from the board space viewpoint. I'll say first from my viewpoint in this, I see a lot in the technology space. I see a lot, and that means both technology and cybersecurity is big discussion in the board space right now. There's another one that I wrote about recently, and it's in the human capital space. And let me just take 2 seconds to really explain why I say this. So human capital, of course, is in the, I view it in the HR space, but the human capital is looking at this from a much higher umbrella from not just hiring processes, but longevity, diversity on teams, everything that has to do with above and beyond just the numbers or the ROI on doing hiring or looking across a workforce. Human capital right now is becoming huge because of potential disclosure requirements, and there's a lot of organization, including the SEC, that's talking about this right now. So the SEC has a group internally that made a recommendation to make it law that public companies will need shortly to start reporting on human capital data and criteria that company is utilizing. And that includes everything from diversity across the workforce, how they are supporting diversity in the workforce, the hiring and firing processes, the longevity of somebody on the team or working with that company. I can tell you that I think we're going to see a huge uptick in the demand and desire to get people that are versed or experts that are versed in both human capital and HR into the boardroom in the next 2 to 5 years. It's going to be huge. So that's my answer to it, Martin, is what I see as some of the expertise currently in huge demand.
Yeah, I love your answer, and your perspective is probably better for this question than mine, because mine, I can just basically tell you what we see come to our table as far as opportunities. And we have ranges of all industries, all different demands. I really can't nail down one specific one. So that one's tough for me to answer. So I'm glad you had a great answer for that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would assume in your field, you see, if someone's retiring or they're looking for an additional skill set, it may not be following a trend right now, but I can tell you when it comes to the nominating committees and working with them, they are very specific, especially the ones that have a look ahead and a future plan and a strategy. They know spending is coming down the pike, and those are the ones I'm hearing the most of right now. Again, it depends on even down to mandatory retirement, who's leaving the board and what expertise gap are they leaving.
Correct.
Drive some of that as well, but typically what I see. All right, another question. Would a video or social media be appropriate materials as part of these board documents? So my personal answer is yes and no. So one is, I am fully open and think it's great to have multiple ways of getting your name out there. I, again, will use my own example of this. I use a monthly newsletter that allows me to write on different topics and establish myself as an expert in the board space. And that can be both from a board candidate viewpoint, a board director viewpoint, as well as a board consultant viewpoint. Sometimes I have videos in those, but I try to keep it very much focused on easily consumable data. Now, you may say a video is very easily consumable, and if you have a website that is something based on your candidate or your board packaging, I'm quite frankly open to that. I think it would be great. But I will say this, what you may think is a great video, I can tell you I would have possibly a much different viewpoint. Of the 10 to 12 board videos someone's put together, or board candidate videos that they put together in the past year or so, I can tell you that only one of them was great. The rest of them, and by the way, your first impression, there is nothing in between terrible and great. Your first impression, it's not, it was okay, right? That actually is terrible. So to me, I really think if you create a video, you have to be dead on with that. It's got to be viewed as a next-gen director type of video. And you want to get across many of the things we talked about for those 5 steps of your interview, including your values-based decisioning. But some of the videos, or most of the videos I've seen, they have actually not come across as them showing themselves or revealing themselves as great communicators by any means.
Mark, can I ask you a follow-up question to that?
Sure.
So what if, and you kind of touched on it a second ago, if that video could touch on values and some of the other things that we talked about, what if the video was a generic interview process where the video would show off a little bit of that, I don't want to say personality side or the know-how, the knowledge, but it was structured as a quote unquote interview process? Would a company benefit from that?
Possibly. And again, I go to above and beyond all of the experience, the expertise, the certifications, even talking about your values, right? You are possibly avoiding the ability or the need for them to call you to the table for an interview, which is the most important part, right? So if something doesn't strike them the minute they view that video, that may have actually hurt your chances of getting to the interview, right?
Okay.
So again, I'm torn with it. All I really say in this is that if you're going to do it, it's got to be done extremely well, and there's going to be some investment in that. Now, most people landing board seats today, they don't have a video for that. If anything, you want to view it as an enhancement. You don't want that to detract from the message, and you don't want it, to detract from your chances of getting to the table.
Sure. Okay. There's another question. How many boards is overboarded?
You want me to answer? You want me to go first on that?
I think that is a perfect question for you.
All
yes.
Right. All right. I'll go first quickly, and then you, and then I think we're right at the top of the hour here. And again, for any questions that we're not able to answer, we'll answer those in email. But the answer for me is, first, it depends, but don't view that as a cop-out on this, because I'm going to explain what I mean by that very quickly. One is, if you're not able to put in 200 to 250 hours a year per board that you serve, you're overboarded, period. So that's the first way to look at it. So if you don't have a day job, meaning you're not a CEO, you're not a C-level, you're not involved in something that it requires you to be there day in, day out, or I should say first, if you are, I really think it's hard to do that job and to be on more than one board that requires that commitment, right? So you're already looking at about 2,000 hours a year minimum for your main job. You have to be able to find another 250 around roughly for your board work. So you just took up your weekends and your availability in the evenings to do that. Now, if board directorship is your career, I go back to, again, this is why I personally love this space, is that I can be boarded up, when I say boarded up with 3, 4, 5 boards, because I know if I multiply that number times the amount of hours, and that is my sole function, I know that I have the amount of time to do that. And as I get older and I want to start scaling back in this, I know based on my time commitment, a number of boards I'm on, I know my time commitment based on that. So as I get closer to not having the energy or whatever it may be as I get older, I can actually ramp down the number of boards that I'm on to 1.1 or maybe even 0. So again, it comes back to always viewing this as looking at the time. Do you have the time you can commit to do all these things properly, plus a percentage above that for times of crisis?
Awesome.
All right. So Martin, I see we're at the top of the hour. I'm a stickler for us sticking to time frames here. Yeah. So number one, I thank you very much. I thank our audience today for joining. We've had quite a few people join today. And please reach out to us if you have any need for help or other questions. We are here to support you. It's our goal to make sure people get on boards and we increase the diversity across the boards that we represent.
Yeah, and I do see a couple of other questions in there. Please email if you want to email me. If you want to email Mark, we'll get the answers to you via email, and then we'll also send you the PDF document as well.
All right. Thank you, everybody. It's been a pleasure. We're glad to be sharing our knowledge with you today. Have a great day.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Mark. Talk to you soon.
Bye now.
Bye.